Sorry. My fault. I don't have the other screen up, so that's why. Hold on. There we go.
With the guitar.
It's time to fasten your seatbelt and rev up that engine. It's time to go on Pit Row. On Pit Row is your weekly look inside the world of NASCAR. Now live, here's the pit crew, Steve Ronkowitz and Charlie Turner.
We don't have smoke today.
We don't have Smoke or Daryl today? Okay, that's fine. Maybe they got caught up in that.
Day off.
Maybe they got caught up in that last wreck at Talladega. Hey, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us on our live NASCAR Hangout on Pit Row this week. I'm Charlie Turner. The two guys down at the bottom of the screen are Dan Beaver and Steve Rockowitz. Hopefully Beth Ann Heisler will join us here shortly. We had a few little tech problems right before the show started, normal live broadcast stuff, but we're here, we're ready to go. And so let me start this all off, because Dan had one of the funniest tweets I've ever seen him put up with about 20 laps to go at Talladega race. He used the expletive word, or the signs for the expletive word about hating Talladega, hating blanking Talladega.
Not my favorite place.
Was this typical Talladega? We didn't really have a big one. We had a whole bunch of medium-sized wrecks, but not the real track clearer of historical nature.
Brad?
It was typical Talladega, but that's the problem. It was typical Talladega. You keep expecting a little something else to go on, and then you got that compounded by Dale Earnhardt Jr. racing scared, or whatever was happening in the last couple of laps. He kind of confirmed that he didn't want to get up in the eye of the storm, so that ruined a lot of people's rosters. I've
seen that strategy before early in the race. I mean, Dale Jarrett used to run that way at the restrictor plate tracks all the time, and had a lot of success running at the back of those races. Bobby Labonte did as well back when he was competitive, but they usually started that way. I mean, they would run at the back for the first 350 laps or so, and then or 350 miles or so, and then they would make a move. Junior didn't go back there until there were 450 miles off the clock. I mean, I didn't get that at all.
He didn't, and he was validated by that one wreck happening while he was back there.
Yeah, he
then
was.
He started to charge towards the front again, but he gave up a second time, and didn't push it very far. I don't know if he was expecting a crash on the last lap or what, but at some point, if you're going to win the race, you got to be with the leaders.
Well, if he's expecting a crash on the last lap, it's too late anyway. I mean, somebody made a point he doesn't have to win anymore this year because he's in the chase, but I can't believe that team's going to run that way. I got to believe they want to win races, don't they?
I would think so, and I wouldn't have predicted that he'd run that conservatively. And now that he has, it calls into question his fantasy relevance at Daytona, and again in the spring or in the fall, depending on exactly what he needs to do. You can't count on winning at Talladega. You can't count on running well at Talladega. And the other thing that was pretty notable was Jeff Gordon's fate. He was running around in the back of the pack too. His crew chief came on the radio and said it's time to move to the front. So he did, started moving towards the front. Went from 34th, I believe, to 15th in the space of 5 laps, getting better every lap, and drove right into the frickin' eye of the storm when Brad Keselowski ran out of talent. Those kinds of things just make me pull my hair out.
There you go, Steve. He served you up. Brad Keselowski ran out of talent. What do you got to say about that?
Well, he kept trying to have a big one, and nobody else would cooperate.
Yeah.
Well, it's his fault nobody else would, participate in a...
Spinning around here, nobody's hitting me.
Yeah.
When you wreck from the lead and nobody hits you, yeah, they're just not playing along.
Trying, you keep putting it out there, and if nobody's going to hang around with you, what can you do? It's, I don't think it was a bad Talladega race as far as Talladega races go. It's, but the thing, like you said, the question now becomes, everybody was saying the new format is such it's going to force people to win races. Well, it's going to force them to win a race, it looks like.
Yeah.
So now the question is, once you have that win, do you just stroke at the back and you no longer have to worry about getting the win so you don't tear up the equipment? So you've created another edge to a sword that you didn't necessarily know was going to occur.
Well, if this is going to continue for the next 10 races, and the guys that have wins aren't going to try real hard to get another win, we're going to end up with 20 first-time winners or one-time winners. And then this whole win and get in thing doesn't really work. I mean, that guarantee's off.
And I don't think that's what was happening where Earnhardt's concerned. I mean, if he hadn't been concerned about getting caught up in a wreck, he'd have been right up in there. He'd have stayed in the front and figured, okay, if I crash, I crash. The bigger concern was he's had so many hard hits at Talladega. The concussion a couple of years back came at this track. So I think the bigger issue was he didn't want to get hurt. And he knew he didn't have to race hard at Talladega and didn't have to risk getting hurt. So he laid back. So everybody else, though, Logano was right up there in the mix, and Harvick was right up there in the mix. And I don't think it affected any of those guys' aggression at the front of the pack other than Earnhardt. And Earnhardt's was a separate situation. The bigger concern is how much are they going to gamble with camber setups and so on so that they actually tear up their cars. I think that's going to keep them out of victory lane in some cases, but it's going to help them find a better setup overall so that they know what they've got to run during the chase.
I want to go back to your point about concussions because I think that's really important and a really, really good thing to bring up. Does NASCAR have a protocol about concussions? NFL has a very strict concussion protocol anymore. And I mean, if you get a concussion in the National Football League, you could be done forever. I don't know what their testing is, but if you do not pass their protocol, whatever it is, you don't play. And Detroit Lions lost a significant piece of their team 2 years ago, Javid Best, because he had a concussion after he'd had concussions in college. Lions drafted him anyway. Let's not discuss that. But he had a concussion in a game on Thanksgiving, his second year in the league, and never played again. Does NASCAR have anything like that in place?
They've got something, and this is the first year they've employed it. And honestly, I don't know exactly what it is. And as with most NASCAR rules, there's that subject to change or subject to.
There's the junior exemption.
Yeah. So
the Earnhardt exemption.
I'm certain it's not a hard and fast rule, but they did put something in place at the beginning of this year to deal with that.
All drivers do have to take a baseline test before the season started, and that will then give them criteria for deciding at a later date whether or not you have been concussed later. So, which they have before.
So if you come in with a half bell rung, you have an advantage over the rest of the field if you get a bell rung later on.
I was gonna say you get a driver like Keselowski who doesn't have a brain. You get a driver like Keselowski who doesn't have a brain in there to begin with, then how are you going to tell? I'm kidding. I like Keselowski. So.
I like the comments. That's good stuff.
Okay, so the comment could be made that pretty much half the field when they start at Talladega doesn't have half a brain.
Or they leave it out there someplace, someplace during the race.
Well, it's not just Talladega is the only track where they have a brain hang-up place with like a cloakroom. But at the beginning of this race, Danica Patrick was running really good, ran up front for a lot of laps. I put our question of the week up for the Shell Saber Card comment of the week during the race. At that time, I said, now, how would you feel if Danica actually won a race? And the comments were mostly positive. But did she run well enough to were you convinced that had the cards shuffled the right way, she could have won this race this last Sunday?
Oh, I think she has a possibility of winning any time you have a restrictor plate race. But like we said last week, was 80% of the field has the ability to win a race just because of the way the field is it kind of plays its way out. I guess the question becomes: is it getting old to be pardon the expression, rag on Danica Patrick. I mean, who, if given $15 million by GoDaddy, regardless of your talent, wouldn't go out there and hop in a race car for 36 races a year? I don't care who.
I have no problem with that. I don't understand I think it's jealousy as much as anything. People that are fans of drivers who don't have the kind of resources that she has think, if my driver was in that car, he'd win 10 races. The fact is, not very many people win more than one race a year, and she's just one of many who hasn't won any. But she looks to me like she could win. I don't know. How would I feel if she did win? I don't think I'd feel anything.
Oh, I'd be very.
I think it would be a good thing. I really do think it would be a good thing. I'm kind of a fan, but.
Well, I think we need more diversity in the sport everywhere. Different races, but it also means we need more female drivers. You look at the IndyCar, and it's not a good comparison because the popularity is not quite the same, but they've got some really strong female racers. Pippa Mann was running really well in the Indy 500 last year. There were 3 or 4 women, I think, in that race, and they were up near the front. So in order to get a real gauge of how NASCAR fans feel about it, and a real gauge of how women can race in the sport, you need more than one, and you need them to be in good equipment. It's hard to know if the negative comments about Danica is misogynistic or because she came from the IndyCar ranks. Probably more has to do with her sex than it does her background, but there's a little bit of both in there. You get a Joanna Long in the Nationwide Series, and I think the comments about her last year were pretty uniformly positive because she's a stock car racer. She didn't have the equipment to do what she needed to do with Mary Miller's 70, but if you got her in good equipment, you got Danica is in good equipment, you get a chance to see what women would do head-to-head.
Steve and I have had a chance to talk to Joanna a number of times, and she's very sharp, and she's talented. She can definitely drive a stock car or truck, whatever. I think she'll get a chance in some decent equipment. I don't think she's going to step into a top 5 team, but I think she may get a chance in Cup and something, and that would be interesting to see more than one woman in a race, and
Danica
see who they can beat.
Has the advantage that she has a sponsor behind her. Now, Johanna Long does not have a sponsor bringing $15 million to the table. Let's talk about Parker Kligerman. Does he have someone who's got $15 million to bring him into a race car? No.
Right.
Okay. Yeah. And it doesn't matter what your gender is. It's all about whether or not there's sponsor money.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter to you, and it really doesn't matter to me or probably to Dan. And I'm sure it doesn't matter to Beth Ann, who just joined us, but it does matter to a sizable percentage of the people who are fans of NASCAR. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. The misogyny exists in this fan base.
Yes, I don't recall Janet Guthrie, Patty Moise. They weren't in the same situation that Danica is. They weren't there every week. So while they were there, NASCAR fans, I don't recall hearing nearly as much negative. But then again, the press wasn't as much as prevalent as it is now. I think a big part of it has to do with also the fact she was an open wheel racer. Mm-hmm. On top of the fact that she's a female. And she didn't pay her dues in stock car racing the way that someone like Parker Kligerman did. So the fans out there see her as taking a ride that Kligerman could have. Now, of course, he couldn't because he doesn't have a sponsor relationship with GoDaddy. But it's hard to reason with some NASCAR with some fans.
Well, before we go too much farther, I think, Steve, we ought to probably do our shell read and talk a little bit about the comment of the week this week and what the question was that we put out there to generate some comments. There were a lot of them.
Well, be sure that you submit your Shell Saver Card comment of the day. You can take home that $50 Shell gift card. Every time Joey Logano, driver of the 22 Shell Pennzoil Ford Fusion, wins a 2014 points race, Shell Saver Card holders will save 22 cents per gallon on any grade of Shell nitrogen-rich gasoline or Shell diesel just by using your Shell Saver Card the Wednesday after the race Offer valid up to 25 gallons. You can go to shell.us/Wednesday for more details.
Good stuff. Joey Logano did not win this week, although he was a contender, so we don't have a 22-cent discount Wednesday this week. We're going to Kansas next week. I think there's a legitimately good shot for that 22 to be in contention next week. Again, the question we put out, or I put out on Sunday to kind of generate some commentary was, how would you feel if Danica Patrick won a race? Not necessarily last Sunday, but any Cup race. And I did not see... I can't recall. I don't have my iPad here, so I can't look at the comments. But we had more than a dozen comments. I think they were generally pretty positive that people feel pretty good. Although there was there was one comment from an old friend of ours, Steve, Darren Havens. You remember Darren?
I sure do.
Hat dance.
I remember Jen.
Yeah, so do I. And but Darren said his comment was, NASCAR is fixed. That's what he said. So I said, well, it might have been good if ARCA would have fixed a race when Danica was running down there. That might have gotten him a little more PR, which is what he was doing. But he said he couldn't do that. He said if Danica had won when she was in ARCA, you would have seen him frown. The only time you'd ever see him frown in winner's circle. So we know where Darren stands on the Danica ledger. Didn't ask him why. I mean, maybe he has some personal
well,
that we don't know about.
There was a fair amount of drivers that, not to digress, but a fair amount of drivers that went through the ARCA series in the last 5 to 7 years that were there strictly because also of money, and their talent level was not up to par of the amount of money that was being thrown behind them. Scott Speed. And there were others. So
bless you.
Yeah. So that's a whole other story. But it comes back to this full circle. It's the same deal. Are there drivers out there that have less talent and more money, as opposed to drivers that have more talent and less money? Yes. That's exactly the point. And it's always been that way. When has it ever been any different?
Let's let Beth Ann chime in on this topic, because she's the only non-guy in this group, and the only one that's ever driven at Talladega. I'll give her that shout out one more time since we're doing Talladega stuff. What do you think? How would you feel, Beth, if Danica won? I mean, is she getting too much of an advantage being in the equipment with the money she's got behind her, or would it still be a righteous win?
No, I think anybody who's got money behind them, what difference does it make whether they're male or female? I'd like to see her win one. I don't know if she can, but I think she could at one of the restrictor plate tracks. So I think it would be good for the sport.
Well, I think we're probably all unanimous in that. So I want to move on to another subject because we've only got about 10 minutes left, and we want to get to Dan before and talk fantasy going to Kansas before we close out of this thing. But the other big story of the week was the fact that Roger Penske announced that he's bringing back Juan Pablo Montoya for at least 2 races in 2014. He's going to be running at Michigan in June, and then coming back for the Brickyard 400 in, I think it's July or August. How do you guys feel about that? I thought it was odd, but I'll let you all chime in.
I don't think it's all that terribly odd. I foresaw that coming. Actually, there were overtures of that. I think it pretty well marked the death knell of Sam Hornish Jr. in any kind of true Penske, full season run from here on out. That would be a ride that Hornish may have been in for those 2 races if you're going to have 3 cars. So if Juan Pablo is going to be in it, Northwest Ohio and Sam Hornish Jr. needs to find something else to do.
Well, they're going to dust off the car this week. You got Ryan Blaney on the entry list, and he's on for at least 1 or maybe 2 more races before the end of the year. So it's a good way to test out talent. We know that the team's going to be strong. We'll talk about him from a fantasy standpoint here in a few minutes too. But and if one gets the 2 road races, like everyone's speculating, then that's definitely going to make him fantasy relevant there.
Well, I looked at that. That was one of the first things I looked at when I saw the announcement. But I don't think so. I don't think he'll make Sonoma. It looks to me like there might be an IndyCar conflict there, but I would fully expect him to be at Watkins Glen, even though they haven't announced that. I mean, if they're going to run him, they're foolish not to run him at one of those racetracks. But that brings up, I want to get to Beth and see what she has to say about this, because I know she's a Montoya fan. But what I thought was odd about it is if he's only going to run Montoya for, in selected tracks where he's good, isn't he kind of doing a disservice to Keselowski and Logano? Because those guys are running for the championship, and right now they got to be, you got in a handful of guys that are favorites for this championship, or at least Logano is, and you're putting a guy out there from your own team that's potentially going to take points away from them.
Yeah, but points don't matter right now. Wins do, and both Keselowski and Logano have wins. Both of those are regular season races, so I don't think it's going to impact that one way or the other. The bigger question would be what happens if Montoya actually managed to win at and that takes one of the races out of the mix because it's not running full time. He wouldn't be in the chase. So you've only got 25 races where drivers could get their 16 wins.
I hadn't thought about it that way. That's why you're the fantasy racing guru. What do you think, Beth? Are you happy to see JPM back?
Well, I like to see him race, but I am torn between that and how he would be interfering with the points championship. So I don't know what else to say about that. He's going to race at Michigan, so that's great because I'll get to be there. But on the other hand, I don't understand why he's bringing him back. Just for a few races.
I mean, is this an audition for a full-time Cup ride next year?
Didn't he have a full-time Cup ride?
He used to. He didn't at the beginning of this year.
Yeah, not this year, but.
But I know that it was his choice to leave. So if he could come back and thumb his nose at Chip Ganassi in the process. Probably pretty happy with that.
I think so. All right. Well, let's enough about Talladega and enough about Juan Pablo. We'll have chances to talk about both of those later in the season. We're going to Kansas, another one of the similarly configured mile-and-a-half tracks, as Dan Beaver loves to call them. I would think this is probably one of the more predictable of those tracks too. Am I right or wrong?
No more, no less. It makes it a little more predictable. Because you've got Kansas and Charlotte that have been in pairs for quite a while, so you've got them in back-to-back. But Kansas has always been the first race of that pair, so Kansas helps you predict Charlotte better than anything else. But for the most part, it's just another mile-and-a-half track, and you can look back at Vegas and Texas and see how your drivers are going to do.
I've always felt that. At least I always felt that Kansas and Chicago were the most similar. Is that true or not?
I think so. They've got fairly similar banking. They were built about the same time. I think you can kind of toss Kentucky in there too. It's not a particularly deeply banked track. So those three tracks are probably ones that help each other the most. For the longest time, though, you had Kansas as only one race, and you've got Chicagoland as only one race. So you needed that little bit of extra data pool to help you out. And Kansas is always kind of, I don't know, it's been an odd race a lot of times. Tire problems, fuel mileage issues, weather problems where they ended under darkness. There's always something a little bit extra going on at Kansas that help defy predictions. Still in all that, you got Greg Biffle for the longest time dominating that track until they repaved it, and then he fell off. So you got to factor that into the mix as well. It's not the easiest track to predict, but it's certainly not as bad as Talladega, and it's not as bad as some of the other standalone tracks.
Okay, so that being said, what's your Yahoo team look like this week?
I don't think you can avoid Matt Kenseth. He was so strong in the mile-and-a-halfs last year, still hasn't won. Still, everybody believes he's going to win. One of his victories last year came at Kansas in this race, and he was in that cycle of one good race, bad race, one good race, one bad race on the cookie-cutter tracks. So he didn't finish all that well in the fall. but he didn't finish all that badly either with an 11th. Then he finished off the season with a 4th at Charlotte, a 3rd at Charlotte, a 4th at Texas, and this year he hasn't been quite as strong, but a 10th and a 7th in the first 2 mile-and-a-half tracks. So it's as good a place for him to break back into victory lane as any place. So he's going to be one of your Group A drivers. Then you might take someone with current momentum as your second Group A driver, someone like Kevin Harvick, who also has won here in the past. And you put him on the roster and you see which one of them does better in practice and qualification. Move down to Group B in the Yahoo game, and you've got Greg Biffle there. He's fallen off quite a bit since the track was repaved, but he's gotten a little bit better each year. I think he's figured it out a little bit more. And you don't necessarily need him to contend for a win. You need a solid top 10 out of him. He and Carl Edwards, I think, are probably the best values in Group B, other than the Penske Fords that are kind of strong everywhere right now. So those 4 drivers, Edwards, Biffle, Keselowski, Logano, probably anchor your Group B lineup. Then we jump down to Group C, and last week was the first time that someone other than Larson or Dillon didn't score top points in Group C. Castle scored top points only because he led a lap and got the bonus points for that. Larson finished ahead of him. So you still got that allocation management problem that you've had all year long. And lo and behold, Roger Penske gives us the gift of Ryan Blaney in a 3rd Penske car. I don't care how, he's not going to finish ahead of Larson. He's not going to finish ahead of Dillon in all likelihood. But if he gets a top 20, it's worth putting him on the roster so that you can save allocations for those other 2 drivers. So Blaney's definitely one of your picks in Group C. Then you have to decide what else you're going to do. If it rains, he's not going to get a chance to qualify. The car has no owner points, so he wouldn't be in the race. He'd be the one car probably that goes home since it's a 44-car roster. So you want to make sure you've got a guaranteed driver that is on the other side of the page. And if it's not Larson or Dillon, it's probably Allgaier, who had a chance to finish in the top 10 in the last 2 races. Flip side of that coin is he didn't. And is that disappointment going to get to him? He made a mistake at Richmond 2 weeks ago, and it wasn't his mistake, but he got caught up in something at the end of the Talladega race. And did that shake his confidence? Only time will tell. But that team's definitely coming on and will probably be fantasy relevant for the end of the season. You're going to use Allgaier as your 3rd driver a lot when Dillon and Larson are down to just the dregs, the last few allocations that you got to give them. That's what it looks like for me.
We know Justin Allgaier, and I don't think you could shake his confidence. He's a very confident guy. All right, so we're just about out of time. I'll go first this week. I'm going to take Greg Biffle. I think Biffle maybe can resurrect his season this week, get a win, and get in the talk of being in the chase. So I'm going to go with somebody who has a history here and is in a Ford. Fords have been pretty good on the mile-and-a-half track so far this year. Other than that, I have no real way to justify my pick, but I'm going with Greg Biffle. Steve, who's your pick?
Well, I have no way to justify my pick either, but I'm going with A.J. Allmendinger just because of a flyer. Been running really well all year, and I think this may be a step out from the shadows kind of week for the 4017.
Could be. Beth Ann, who you like?
Oh, I'm going to go with Matt Kenseth.
So you go with Dan's pick. I like that pick too. Dan? On the spot.
I would go with Matt Kenseth as well. If not him, then Jimmy Johnson. One of those guys is going to end up in victory lane in the next 2 or 3 weeks.
You would think. Who else hasn't won? I mean, it's just those guys, right? Pretty much now.
And Jeff Gordon,
Gordon hasn't won.
leading the points still, and I was surprised he was still in the points lead. But I think those are the 3 drivers that you got to believe they're going to get in victory lane before the Brickyard.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks everybody for joining us this week, hanging out here, talking NASCAR on Pit Row. Thanks for working through the technical issues we had early on. We got out pretty much on time, and we're going to get out pretty much on time. Steve, you got some closing music over there? We're going to...
On Pit Row, and now you're up to speed with the best information about the world of NASCAR. Come back next week and join the pit crew, Steve and Charlie, and go On Pit Row. On Pit Row is a presentation of Bench Racing Productions.
Hey, this is David Reagan, driver of the number 6 AAA Ford Fusion, and you're listening to On Pit Road.
Pit Row.
Hey, everybody.